welcome to the first episode of my podcast. I'm your host, Moses-Denham, and today on the show we'll be discussing the use of psychedelic substances to treat mental illness in New Zealand. If you're a fan of today's content, remember to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts, so sit back and enjoy. So, first off, this might be somewhat of a strange introduction, but I want you to close your eyes and picture New Zealand, Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud. I want you to think about what are the first things that come to mind when you think of our country. I presume you live here, but if you don't, think anyway. I'll give you a moment, but what comes to mind? For some people, it might be the serene and breathtaking nature, the unique wildlife. Others might think of the culture, fish and chips, jandals, going down to the dairy. And some might think about how we have some of the highest rates in teen suicide, domestic violence, and substance abuse per capita in the developed world. Yikes. Now that's pretty grim, but it's simply a reality that New Zealand, much like anywhere else in the world, suffers from its fair share of social issues. And one that I don't think that's talked about nearly enough is our nation's collective faltering in our mental health. Studies conducted by the New Zealand government have shown a significant increase in New Zealanders reporting higher rates of stress, depression, and anxiety over the last decade. Since 2018, an averaging estimates across several conducted surveys has shown a 22% attributed to self-reported poor mental health, and this is something that only looks to be trending higher with each passing year. The health sector's rate of also issuing prescribed medications to treat mental illness, such as antidepressants, has increased steadily as well. Now, the cause for why mental illness has been on the rise is debatable, and most likely it's a combination of several factors. What I want to discuss today is not so much the root of the issue, but how we can treat it going forward. Now, I mentioned before how New Zealand has very high rates of substance abuse and addiction. And while this might seem to be a strange direction to head in, the answer could well be there. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all crawl out onto the streets and start smoking meth, but what I want to talk about are psychedelic substances. Now, just a quick disclaimer here, but this podcast is for educational purposes only, and that I do not condone any illegal activity. The substances I'm going to discuss today are currently considered prohibited Class A substances by the New Zealand government, and detrimental effects aside, just possessing any of these could land you in a spot of trouble with the law, including fines and even imprisonment. So stay smart, guys, stay safe, don't be dumb. Now, what are psychedelics? Psychedelics are a type of drug incorporating many different substances that most commonly induce mind-expanding effects, including euphoria and hallucinations. Now, something I just want to get out of the way is when I was doing research for this episode, I encountered a lot of people who are advocating for a similar outcome of legalization based purely off of personal experiences. Now, I just want to say that this podcast won't be consisting of druggy ramblings going like, oh, I took a hit of this stuff, man, and it changed my life, man. I discovered empathy and the secrets to the universe. No, I want to take an objective look at both the issue and this plausible solution. Now, the two substances I want to focus on are lysergic diethylamide and psilocybin. Now, I mentioned before that there were a vast variety of psychedelic substances that exist in the world, so why these two? Well, firstly, these two substances encompass what are known as the classic psychedelics, and they are by far the most common and well-researched. And whilst having quite similar effects, they do vary in many regards, so it's important to understand the distinctions between them. So firstly, psilocybin. Psilocybin, or magic mushrooms, have been used by humans for thousands of years, and they can be found all across the world across hundreds of various species. Magic mushrooms were brought into popular culture in the 1960s during the hippie movement by ways of popular social figures like Terence McKenna and through media and, of course, music. They tend to grow in the wild during the winter and autumn months, and if you've ever seen people here in New Zealand randomly searching roundabouts or public parks kind of between the months of May and August, then they're probably mushroom foraging. Now, I'm obviously not really going to go into like how you find them or what they look like, but I just have to say one of the main dangers of ingesting mushrooms grown wildly is that there are many poisonous and potentially fatal lookalikes out there that can cause all sorts of nasty side effects. So, if you're out somewhere in the world and you see a mushroom, you decide to eat it because you want to have this life-changing experience, um, you might still have one, but just not the one you're hoping for. A typical recreational dosage is measured in grams, and the substance can be ingested by being either consumed, just as sort of plain mushroom, or it can be brewed into a tea. After being ingested, psilocybin is transformed into psilocin, which resembles serotonin. Serotonin regulates mood and perception in the brain, and sort of under the influence of psilocybin, psilocin stimulates serotonin receptors. The effects of magic mushrooms last around 4 to 6 hours and consist of visual and sensual distortions to your environment and a heightened sense of self and amplified emotions. Now, despite magic mushrooms being prevalent virtually everywhere around the world, they are widely considered to be illegal, and in most countries, most countries' drug legislation, they're considered highly dangerous. Now, moving on to lysergic diethylamide. LSD, as it's also known, is a chemical substance synthesized from a fungus known as ergot, which grows on grain. LSD was discovered in 1938 by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, who was originally attempting to create an analeptic drug capable of treating circulation and respiratory illnesses. And while this endeavor ultimately failed, he did of course stumble on something that was much more interesting. Psilocybin, or LSD, like psilocybin, was popularized in the 1960s and shares the same effects. LSD does last considerably longer though, somewhere between 8 to 12 hours, where mushroom is usually about 4 to 6. LSD is most commonly ingested by placing a small amount of the liquid on a piece of blotter paper known as tabs and is absorbed through the glands in the mouth. LSD is also widely illegal and often under the same classification as magic mushrooms or psilocybin, but it does tend to be more prominent as it can be found and sold year-round. So now that we know what these substances are, how do they work, and why would they be useful towards treating mental illness? Stay tuned for the next episode where I'll be discussing the medicinal benefits of these substances, how they could be implemented in our health systems, as well as deconstructing some of the negative stigmas around their usage. See ya!